The restaurant was the kind of place where every detail whispered wealth, from the marble floors polished to a mirror sheen to the soft golden light that made every glass of champagne shimmer like liquid sunlight. Waiters glided between tables, their crisp uniforms immaculate, their smiles perfectly practiced. The scent of seared steak and truffle oil lingered in the air, mingling with the muted clink of silverware and the murmur of polite conversation. Amara moved with quiet grace among it all, balancing a tray of crystal glasses with the ease of long practice. She had been working at the Silver Fig for almost a year now, ever since her scholarship had only covered part of her music school tuition. By day she attended classes, poring over sheet music and studying music theory. By night, she served the city's elite, men and women who didn't notice the staff unless their wine was late or their soup too cold. Her coworkers liked her. She was kind, always ready to help when someone dropped a plate or got stuck with a difficult table. But tonight, as she glanced at the private section near the grand piano, she felt a knot form in her stomach. That table, Table 7, was reserved for one of their most demanding guests, Mr. Richard Whitmore. Everyone knew the name. The man had inherited an empire of hotels and real estate, and his money bought him the arrogance of a king. He was handsome in a cold, sculpted way, with silver-streaked hair and a habit of talking to people like he was humoring children. The staff called him the judge, behind his back, because every visit felt like a trial, and no one left unscathed. As Amara approached with the wine list, she caught fragments of his booming laughter. He was entertaining a group of similarly dressed men, all expensive suits and smug smiles. They lounged in the plush chairs like they owned the room, and perhaps, in some way, they did. "Good evening, gentlemen," Amara said softly, keeping her voice steady. "Would you like to see the specials tonight?" Whitmore's eyes flicked to her. They were pale blue, sharp as glass. He leaned back and gave her a slow, assessing look, the kind that made her wish she could disappear. "You're new," he said, though she wasn't. "No, sir," Amara replied, forcing a polite smile. "I've been here for several months." He smirked. "Ah, I see. I must not have noticed you before." He turned to his friends. "Isn't that strange? I tend to remember the help." They laughed, and Amara felt the heat rise to her cheeks. She focused on the notepad in her hand, scribbling down their drink orders, pretending she didn't hear the chuckles that followed. But as she leaned forward to collect their menus, she couldn't help it, she hummed. Just a small thing, a tune she always carried with her when she worked. It calmed her nerves, a simple melody she'd written herself, something soft and hopeful, like sunlight through rain. Whitmore's eyes narrowed. "What's that sound?" Amara froze. "I'm sorry. That humming," he said, his voice loud enough that the nearby tables turned. "Are you singing while serving?" Her throat tightened. "I didn't realize. My apologies, sir." He exchanged a glance with his companions, who grinned in anticipation. No, don't apologize," Whitmore said, his tone falsely generous. "You have a tune in your head. Let's hear it properly. There's a piano over there." The words hit her like a slap. For a moment, she thought she'd misheard. "Excuse me," he gestured toward the glossy black grand piano near the center of the restaurant. "Go on, entertain us. You know how to play, don't you?" Most waitresses don't have the nerve to show off their little talents. Laughter rippled across the table. One of the men muttered, "This should be good." Amara's pulse pounded in her ears. The piano wasn't just an instrument to her. It was her world, her dream, her escape. But the way he said it, the mocking tilt of his lips, turned it into a weapon. He didn't want music, he wanted a spectacle. Her fingers twitched at her side. She could refuse. She could walk away, report him, or pretend she hadn't heard. But she needed this job. Rent was due next week, and her next tuition payment wasn't far behind. So she stood there, swallowing the hurt that burned her throat. "Of course, sir," she said quietly. "If that's what you'd like." Whitmore leaned back, satisfied. "Good. Let's see what our songbird can do." As she turned toward the piano, the chatter of the restaurant dimmed. A few patrons glanced up, curious. The light from the chandelier caught the faint sheen of sweat on her hands. Her reflection wavered in the polished surface of the instrument, and for a heartbeat, she saw herself as he must have, just a waitress in a borrowed uniform. But somewhere deep inside, beneath the humiliation, Another part of her stirred. The part that lived for music, the part that refused to bow. She took a slow breath, lifted the piano lid, and touched the keys. Her hands trembled once, then steadied. If he wanted a performance, she decided, he would get one. Just not the one he expected. The restaurant had fallen into a peculiar silence. Even the usual clinking of glasses and quiet chatter seemed to hold its breath as Amara sat at the grand piano. She could feel eyes on her, curious, judgmental, waiting. The polished black surface gleamed beneath the chandelier, and her reflection stared back at her, a version of herself she barely recognized, nervous, humiliated, and yet strangely defiant. Mr. Whitmore leaned back in his chair, one arm draped over the backrest, the picture of smug amusement. His friends smirked, elbows nudging each other as though they were about to witness a circus act rather than a performance. "Well," he called out, his voice slicing through the quiet. "Show us what you've got, sweetheart." The word hit her like ice water. She closed her eyes for a second, forcing herself to breathe. Her fingers hovered just above the ivory keys, trembling. For a moment, she considered faking it, tapping out some simple tune, smiling, bowing, and going back to work. But then she remembered her mother. Her mother, who used to hum the same melody while washing dishes in their tiny apartment. Her mother, who had saved for years to buy a second-hand keyboard just so Amara could practice. Her mother, who had died 2 years ago, leaving her daughter with nothing but that melody and a dream. No, she wouldn't give this man the satisfaction of turning her gift into a joke. The first notes she played were soft, tentative, almost fragile. A simple chord progression that floated through the air like the faintest breath of wind. A few diners turned their heads. The notes wove together, gentle and uncertain, before slowly building into something richer, fuller. The laughter from table 7 faded. Amara's fingers began to move faster, more certain now, as she lost herself in the rhythm. The melody unfurled like a story, tender and aching. It spoke of longing, of small victories and quiet heartbreaks, of nights spent dreaming with empty pockets and endless hope. She poured everything into the music. The exhaustion of double shifts, the sting of condescension, the ache of missing her mother. Each note was a piece of her soul. The grand piano, which had so often been just an ornament in that restaurant, now came alive beneath her hands. The sound filled every corner, climbing the walls, echoing in crystal glasses. The waiters paused mid-step. Conversation stopped. Even the chef peeked out from the kitchen door. Mr. Whitmore's smirk began to falter. He had expected something childish, a simple tune, a clumsy attempt at entertainment. But what he heard was something else entirely. The precision, the power, the emotion, it all collided into a symphony that no one could ignore. Amara's eyes were closed, her head tilted slightly toward the keys. Her body moved with the rhythm, fluid, free. The song shifted, growing darker, then triumphant, before softening into something like forgiveness. Every note felt like both a confession and a declaration. When she reached the climax, the room seemed to pulse with the energy of it. The final chords cascaded like a storm breaking into sunlight, fierce and beautiful. And then, silence. The kind of silence that holds reverence, not emptiness. Amara lifted her hands from the keys slowly, as if afraid to break the spell. She sat there, breathing hard, her chest rising and falling. She didn't dare look up. For a long heartbeat, nothing happened. Then came the sound of a single clap. It was hesitant at first, from somewhere near the bar. Then another, then more. Within moments, the entire restaurant was applauding, the sound swelling like a wave. People were standing, some even whistling softly. Amara blinked in disbelief. She hadn't played in front of a real audience since her last recital, and she had never expected applause here, in this place. When she finally looked toward table 7, Mr. Whitmore was staring at her. His face was unreadable, his fingers tapping the table, his lips slightly parted. His friends had stopped laughing. One of them muttered, "Holy hell," under his breath. Whitmore cleared his throat, but no words came. His pride wouldn't let him show how shaken he was, yet the redness in his face betrayed him. He lifted his glass, hiding behind it, and took a long sip of wine. Amara stood and smoothed her apron, her hands still trembling, not from nerves now, but from the rush of adrenaline and relief. She walked back to their table with quiet composure. "Your order will be out shortly," she said softly, her tone professional, controlled. Whitmore finally found his voice. He stopped, swallowed hard. You didn't mention you could play like that. Amara met his gaze. You didn't ask, sir. For once, he had no clever response. He just looked at her, speechless, the faintest trace of respect, or was it shame, flickering in his eyes. As she walked away, the whispers began again, but they were different this time, not mocking, but amazed. Diners were asking her name, wondering where she had learned to play. Somewhere near the entrance, a man in a dark suit was on his phone, murmuring excitedly about raw talent and potential. Amara didn't hear any of it. She just exhaled deeply, her heart still thrumming to the rhythm of her own music. For the first time that night, she felt weightless, not a waitress serving the rich, but an artist who had, if only for a few minutes, reminded everyone, even Mr. Whitmore, what dignity sounded like. The final note still hung in the air like a sigh, soft and trembling, before fading into silence. For several long seconds, the world seemed suspended, the restaurant caught between applause and awe, the clatter of silverware and hum of conversation forgotten. Amara's hands rested lightly on the keys, the tips of her fingers tingling from the force of what she'd just played. She felt her pulse hammering in her throat, every beat a reminder that she had just laid bare her soul before strangers. Slowly, the room came back to life. The first sound was a quiet gasp, then the gentle rustle of people shifting in their chairs. A man near the bar stood and began to clap. It was soft at first, almost uncertain, but others followed. In moments, the entire restaurant was applauding, their faces alight with something between surprise and admiration. Amara blinked, stunned. She hadn't expected this. When she'd sat down at the piano, humiliation had burned in her chest. Now, that fire had changed. Not gone, but transformed into something fierce, something free. She stood slowly, bowed her head slightly in gratitude, and stepped away from the piano. At table 7, Mr. Whitmore was motionless. His friends had stopped clapping, unsure whether to look at him or her. The mockery that had danced so easily on their lips earlier had vanished. For the first time that evening, the confident businessman looked utterly lost for words. When Amara approached their table, she did it with the quiet composure she'd practiced for years, back straight, steps even, voice steady. Would you like me to bring your main course now, sir? Whitmore looked up at her, his face unreadable. You play beautifully, he said at last, his tone stripped of arrogance. I didn't expect. He stopped himself, realizing how hollow that sounded. Amara smiled faintly, her expression polite but distant. Most people don't expect much from the help, she said softly. Enjoy your meal. She turned to leave, but something in her voice, the calmness, the quiet strength, made him rise from his chair. Wait, he said. The word was rough, uncertain, almost human. I was out of line earlier. That was extraordinary. His companions exchanged awkward glances, clearly uncomfortable. One of them muttered something about needing a smoke and hurried away. Amara hesitated, then gave him a small nod. Thank you. She didn't stay to bask in his praise. Instead, she returned to her station, picked up a tray, and began setting out glasses for a new table. But the restaurant wasn't the same. Everywhere she turned, eyes followed her, not with pity or dismissal, but with quiet reverence. A woman at the corner table asked her for her name, and a man in a tailored suit handed her a business card, saying he was an event coordinator for a local arts foundation. She accepted it politely, still half in disbelief. Whitmore, meanwhile, sat back down, his fingers drumming the table absent-mindedly. His mind replayed the music, the sheer depth of it. It wasn't something that could be faked or learned for show. It was born of pain, discipline, and truth. For a man who prided himself on reading people, he suddenly realized how blind he'd been. He poured himself a glass of wine but barely touched it. The laughter that had once rolled so easily off his tongue wouldn't come. He felt something else now, something uncomfortably close to shame. After the last guests left and the chandeliers dimmed, Amara untied her apron and hung it on the hook behind the counter. Her coworkers surrounded her, faces glowing with pride and astonishment. Girl, I didn't know you could do that. One of them said, still wide-eyed. Amara laughed softly. Neither did they, she murmured. As she stepped outside, The city night greeted her, cool air tinged with the scent of rain and distant car horns. She walked toward the bus stop, her shoes clicking lightly on the pavement. In her pocket was the business card from the man who'd been watching her play. She turned it over in her fingers, tracing the embossed gold letters. Marcus Grant, Director, the Metropolitan Arts Guild. He'd said something about a showcase coming up, a scholarship opportunity, perhaps. Her chest tightened with a cautious kind of hope. Behind her, she heard someone calling her name. She turned to see Mr. Whitmore emerging from the restaurant, his coat thrown over his arm. He looked different now, smaller somehow, less polished. When he caught up to her, he hesitated, as if unsure how to speak to her outside the walls of his wealth. "I just wanted to say, thank you," he said, "for reminding me what real talent looks like. He faltered, searching for the right words. "I was wrong to treat you that way." Amara studied him for a moment. His apology wasn't smooth or practiced, it was awkward, genuine, almost boyish. She nodded once. "You weren't the first to underestimate me," she said, "and you won't be the last. But I'm glad you listened." He looked at her, something like admiration flickering in his eyes. "I won't forget tonight," he said quietly. She gave him a small, forgiving smile. "Neither will I." Then she turned and walked toward the bus stop, her figure illuminated by the soft glow of the streetlights. The sound of the piano still echoed in her mind, a promise and a reminder that no amount of arrogance or privilege could ever silence what was meant to be heard. A month later, the marquee outside the downtown concert hall bore her name, Amara Lewis, live in concert. Inside, the same grand piano gleamed under the lights, waiting for her touch. And somewhere in the audience, Richard Whitmore sat quietly in the back row, listening, not as a man of wealth, but as a man humbled by the music of a waitress who had once reminded him that grace can rise from the unlikeliest of places.